All right, today we're diving into the fascinating story of a drug that was born from a very modern medical problem. It's an incredible tale of genetic engineering, life-or-death emergencies, and a brilliant solution that works kind of like a molecular decoy.
So let me ask you a question. What if you were taking a medication that was literally saving your life, but you knew that in a major emergency there was no way to turn it off? That's the exact terrifying dilemma that doctors were facing with a whole new class of drugs, and it's the puzzle at the very heart of our story today.
Okay, so let's get right into this paradox. For a long time, doctors have used blood thinners to stop things like strokes and dangerous clots. And recently, a whole new generation of these drugs hit the market. They were a huge leap forward, but they came with a pretty serious hidden danger. So here's the breakdown of the trade-off that doctors were dealing with. You had the older drugs, like warfarin, which were kind of a pain. You needed constant monitoring, they interacted with everything, but they had an antidote. Then you have these newer drugs, these DOACs, which were a game changer. So much easier for patients, much safer in a lot of ways. The problem? The huge problem? If a patient taking one got into a bad car accident or had a brain bleed, doctors had no specific off switch, no way to quickly reverse the drug's effects.
So how do you solve a puzzle like that? Well, you get clever. You design a molecular trap. And this is exactly where Andexanet Alfa comes into the picture. It's just an incredibly smart solution engineered from the ground up to fill this one critical need in emergency medicine.
Now, to really get how the solution works, you first got to understand the target. The drugs we're talking about are called factor XA inhibitors. Just think of factor XA as the master switch, the very first domino in the whole chain reaction that makes a blood clot. These drugs work very simply by holding that switch in the off position, which is great when you're trying to prevent a stroke, but, a huge problem when you're bleeding uncontrollably.
And this is where the magic happens. It's so elegant. Here's how it works. The inhibitor drug is floating around, grabbing onto your body's natural factor XA, basically holding it hostage. Then, doctors introduce Andexanet Alfa into your bloodstream. Now, this stuff is designed to look exactly like factor XA, but it's a dud. It's a decoy. The drug can't tell the difference. It's chemically drawn to the decoy, so it lets go of your real functional factor XA and latches onto the decoy instead. It basically acts like a sponge, soaking up all the inhibitor, and that frees up your body's own clotting machinery to finally do its job and stop the bleeding.
And you got to remember, this is not something they just found in nature. This is a marvel of pure bioengineering. Scientists literally designed and built this protein in a lab. They deliberately tweaked it so it would be the perfect bait, but also so it couldn't actually participate in clotting itself. It's a purpose-built molecular machine.
So let's talk about what this looks like in a real emergency. This antidote isn't for a minor cut or scrape. We're talking about the most extreme, life-threatening situations where, literally, every single second counts.
Yeah, these are the absolute worst-case scenarios where Andexanet Alfa is a lifesaver. We're talking about a bleed inside your skull, massive internal bleeding in the stomach or intestines, or just catastrophic bleeding from a terrible accident. In those moments, stopping the bleed is the only thing that matters.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of treatment. The doctors in the ER have to think fast. They do some quick math based on exactly which drug the patient was taking, how much of it they took, and how recently they took it. All that determines if they get a low dose or a high dose. It's incredibly precise medicine happening on the fly.
But with any powerful medicine, there's almost never a free lunch. This life-saving drug isn't without its own risks. And it forces doctors into a really tough calculation, balancing a life saved right now against potential problems down the road.
First, the good news. The upside is huge, no question. The big clinical trial for this drug found that in about 80% of patients having a major bleed, it worked beautifully. It got the bleeding under control. It absolutely does its job. But
here's the flip side. Here's the trade-off. By flipping that clotting switch back on, you reintroduce the exact risk the patient was on the blood thinner to prevent in the first place. The data shows that about 10 to 15% of patients who get this drug will have a blood clot, like a stroke or a clot in their lungs, sometime within the next 30 days.
And that really gets to the core of this whole dilemma. The reversal agent fixes the immediate emergency. It stops the bleed, but it doesn't fix the underlying condition that made the patient need a blood thinner. That risk is still there. So doctors are making this calculated, real-time bet. Stopping a fatal bleed right now is worth the risk of a potential clot later.
And that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. And for a lot of people, it's the most challenging part of the story. This incredible, groundbreaking technology, well, it comes with a really steep price tag.
We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars for a single course of treatment. Think about what that means. It creates this huge barrier. Not every hospital can afford to keep this on the shelf. And that raises some really tough questions about who gets access to this kind of life-saving care.
So, when you put it all together, what's the takeaway? Well, Andexanet Alfa is, without a doubt, a masterpiece of targeted drug design. It's a perfect example of science seeing a very specific problem and then engineering an equally specific, elegant solution to fix it.
But it also leaves us with this bigger, tougher question. As our medicine gets more sophisticated, more powerful, and, frankly, more expensive, how do we make sure that these incredible breakthroughs are actually available to everyone who needs them? As the price of saving a life keeps going up, who gets left behind? It's a challenge we're going to be facing more and more. Thanks for listening.